The office tower rose before dawn like a monument to certainty, its glass skin catching the first thin blade of light and bending it into something cold and impressive, the kind of building that made people straighten their backs before entering. Inside, the executive floor breathed quiet wealth. Carpets so thick footsteps vanished, walls dressed in abstract art no one questioned, and the faint scent of polished wood and expensive coffee lingering in the air. Victor Hale arrived early, as he always did, coat draped over one arm, confidence worn like a tailored suit. He had built this place from nothing, or so he liked to say, and the story had hardened into a shield against doubt. His office waited at the end of the corridor, glass-walled and commanding. The city spread behind it like proof. On his desk lay a single sheet of paper, old enough to look fragile, covered in unfamiliar symbols and slanted handwriting that refused to be understood at a glance. It had arrived the night before from an overseas partner, accompanied by a polite note suggesting urgency. Victor had slept well anyway. By the time his senior managers gathered, coffee steaming in their hands, his mood was light, almost playful. He lifted the paper and waved it like a prop. "Gentlemen, ladies," he said, smiling. "Apparently this little relic is worth millions." A few chuckles circled the room. He explained that the message was written in an obscure dialect, something archaic, something deliberately difficult. "I've hired the best translators," he continued, tapping the page, "and none of them could crack it." He leaned back, folding his arms, eyes bright with amusement. "So here's a challenge. I'll give my entire salary for a year to anyone in this building who can translate it accurately." Laughter followed, louder now, edged with admiration for his bravado. The managers exchanged glances, some impressed, some relieved they weren't expected to answer. Victor enjoyed the moment the way authority made jokes land harder. That was when the door opened quietly behind them, unnoticed at first, because no one ever looked when the cleaning staff entered. Elena pushed her cart in with practiced care, moving around the room like a shadow, collecting trash, wiping surfaces that would never remember her hands. She had learned invisibility early in life. It kept things simple. As she emptied a bin near the desk, Victor's eyes flicked toward her and his smile sharpened. "Careful," he said, nodding in her direction, voice deliberately loud. "Maybe our janitor here can save us all." The room laughed again, some out of habit, some out of discomfort. Elena paused, fingers tightening on the trash bag. She had heard laughter like this before. Casual, careless, aimed without thought. Usually she let it pass. But the paper on the desk caught her eye, the shapes tugging at something buried deep in memory, like a melody half remembered. Her grandmother's voice stirred faintly, patient and firm, teaching letters by candlelight long after the world had taken everything else. Elena swallowed and stepped closer, heart beating faster than she expected. "Sir," she said softly, her voice steady despite the room's attention. "May I see it?" The laughter stumbled, surprised into silence. Victor turned, eyebrows lifting, amused curiosity replacing mockery. He studied her for a second, the plain uniform, the tired but focused eyes, and shrugged. "Why not?" he said, sliding the paper toward her. "Go ahead. The offer stands." There was confidence in his tone, the kind that assumes the ending before the story unfolds. Elena picked up the page carefully, as if it were something alive. The paper smelled faintly of age and dust. Her eyes moved slowly, deliberately, tracing each symbol, each curve and line unlocking something that had slept for years. The room waited. Someone cleared their throat. Victor leaned back again, watching her with a half-smile, already imagining the joke he would make when she failed. Elena's lips moved silently, translating not into words yet, but into understanding. The dialect was old, yes, but familiar, woven with idioms and honor-bound phrasing that no modern translator would bother to learn. Her grandmother had insisted it mattered. Elena felt a strange calm settle over her, the way it used to when lessons finally made sense. She looked up once, meeting Victor's eyes, and something in her expression, quiet certainty, not defiance, made his smile falter just a little. The city outside glinted indifferently as the moments stretched. A thin thread pulled tight between laughter and truth, waiting to snap. Elena drew a slow breath and began to speak, and the room changed not with a bang but with a subtle shift, like air pressure before a storm. The kind you feel in your ears before you understand what it means. Her voice was calm, unhurried, carrying none of the nervousness Victor had expected. She started with the opening line, translating it word for word, then paused to explain that the greeting itself was already a test, written in a form used only when the sender believed the recipient might not be worthy of direct trust. A few of the managers straightened unconsciously, pens hovering above notepads they hadn't planned to use. Elena continued, her eyes returning to the page, explaining how the language relied heavily on implied meaning, how certain phrases appeared polite on the surface but concealed conditions beneath them, like traps disguised as courtesies. Victor shifted in his chair, the leather creaking louder than it should have in the growing silence. As Elena translated the second section, she explained that the letter referenced an old commercial code, one that predated modern contracts, where agreements were sealed not only by signature but by cultural acknowledgement. "They are reminding you," she said gently, "that respect comes before profit." The words landed with unexpected weight. Someone inhaled sharply. Elena moved on, pointing out a sentence that most automated translators would dismiss as ceremonial fluff. "In truth," she said, "it was a warning. If the response failed to mirror the same linguistic humility, the sender would interpret it as arrogance, and arrogance in that culture justified punishment." Victor felt a tightening in his chest, a sensation he usually associated with bad investments, not cleaning staff explanations. He interrupted her once, unable to help himself. "You're saying this isn't just a message," he said, forcing a light tone. "It's a threat." Elena looked at him, not accusingly, but with something like concern. "It's an invitation," she corrected, "and a warning if the invitation is mishandled." She continued, translating a paragraph that referenced shared history, names of rivers, festivals, ancestral promises, details that had nothing to do with business on the surface. Elena explained that these references were a measure of sincerity, a way to see whether the recipient valued people over paperwork. Around the room, skepticism melted into disbelief. One manager quietly checked the original email on a tablet, matching Elena's translations to phrases he could now recognize through her explanations. They lined up disturbingly well. Victor's confidence began to fracture, not dramatically, but in hairline cracks that spread with every sentence. Elena reached the final section and slowed, choosing her words carefully. She explained that the closing lines outlined consequences without stating them directly, using a proverb that meant something like "those who eat alone are remembered when the harvest fails." She looked up. "If you had replied with a standard legal response," she said softly, "they would have taken it as an insult. They would have withdrawn, publicly, and pursued compensation for wasted time. It would have cost millions and worse, reputation." The room was silent now. No laughter, no whispers, just the hum of the building and the distant city below. Victor stood slowly, his movements deliberate, as if standing too fast might shatter whatever composure he had left. He took the paper from Elena's hands, reading it again with new eyes, seeing not nonsense but a map he had almost ignored. "No one," he said quietly, "has spoken about this dialect in decades." He looked at her. "How do you know it?" Elena hesitated, then answered simply. "My grandmother was a linguistics professor," she said. "When everything else was taken from us, she taught me languages so I would never be powerless." The honesty in her voice cut deeper than any accusation. Victor felt heat rise behind his eyes, an unfamiliar mix of shame and awe. He looked around the room at the managers who had laughed with him, who had stood in expensive suits while the truth had pushed a cleaning cart through the door. "I made a promise," he said at last, his voice quieter now. "My salary." Elena shook her head before he could finish. "I don't want your salary," she said. "I want you to understand what almost happened, and I want a chance to use what I know." The words settled heavily, undeniable. Victor nodded once, a gesture that felt like surrender. In that moment, the power in the room shifted, not away from him entirely, but into something humbler, something earned rather than assumed. The building felt different by afternoon, as if the glass and steel had absorbed the morning's revelation and softened around the edges. The usual rush of authority replaced by a low, thoughtful current that followed Elena wherever she went. Word traveled fast in places like this, not as gossip but as correction, and people who had once stepped around her cart now looked twice, some with curiosity, others with quiet respect. Elena sat in a small, temporary office near the executive floor, sunlight spilling across a desk that still smelled faintly of fresh varnish. The letter spread before her as she made careful notes, not out of obligation but habit. She believed knowledge deserved care. Outside the door, Victor stood longer than he intended, listening to the scratch of her pen, rehearsing words that felt strangely inadequate. Knocking did not come easily to him. Doors had always opened when he approached. When he finally did, the sound was hesitant. Elena looked up and offered a polite smile, the kind that invited conversation without demanding it. Victor stepped inside, closing the door behind him, suddenly aware of how small the room was, how exposed he felt without the wide desk and city view to frame him. "I wanted to thank you," he began, then stopped, realizing how thin that sounded. He tried again. "You saved more than a contract today." Elena tilted her head slightly, listening. Victor continued, words coming slower now, each one chosen rather than thrown. He admitted that he had built his success on speed and certainty, on the belief that money could solve most problems faster than patience ever could. "I laughed," he said, not excusing it, just stating it, "because I didn't know what I didn't know." Elena closed her notebook gently. "Most people do," she said. "They just don't get caught in time." The honesty stung, but it didn't wound. Victor nodded, absorbing it. He told her he had already called the overseas partners, that he would respond using the language and structure she had outlined, acknowledging tradition before terms. "I'd like you involved," he said, not as a consultant hidden behind the scenes, but openly. Elena considered him, searching his face for signs of performance, of ego reshaping itself for convenience. What she found instead was uncertainty, raw and unfamiliar. She spoke carefully. "If I stay," she said, "it won't be to decorate decisions already made. I'll speak when something is wrong." Victor let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "I need that," he said. The admission felt like a crack in armor but also like air. Later that day, a meeting was called, not in the grand boardroom but in a smaller space where people had to sit closer, listen harder. Victor introduced Elena not with titles, but with a story, brief, factual, humbling. He repeated his own words from the morning, the challenge, the laughter, the silence that followed. "This company," he said, voice steady, "almost failed today because I mistook confidence for knowledge." He looked at Elena. "That won't happen again." Applause followed, hesitant at first, then sincere. Elena did not smile widely. She accepted it with a nod, understanding that respect, like language, had layers. In the days that followed, policies shifted quietly. Training sessions were added. Cultural advisors were consulted instead of ignored. And something else changed, something harder to measure. People began to greet the cleaning staff by name. Victor noticed it one evening as he left late, passing a janitor who nodded at him with easy familiarity. He stopped, returned the nod, and felt the moment settle into him like a lesson finally learned. Weeks later, when the overseas partners responded warmly, praising the respect shown in the reply, Victor forwarded the message to Elena with a single line beneath it. "We listened." She replied with equal brevity. That's all they asked. The tower still stood tall against the sky, still gleamed with ambition, but inside it now lived a quieter truth, that intelligence does not announce itself with laughter, that dignity often wears simple clothes, and that sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is shut up long enough to hear the voice they once ignored.